For those who are just joining, my name is Dana Oborn. I'm one of the executives here at the Council of Canadian Innovators. I'll be running point today just to facilitate the conversation. Just some housekeeping rules before we get rolling. Everybody is slated on mute today, and we're going to keep it that way. It gets a little bit unruly if we have to manage questions coming in and out. If you have questions, myself and my team are going to be monitoring the chat. I'm sure folks will have a lot to say about a number of the items that we're going to run through today. And with that, I'm joined by CCI's president, Benjamin Bergen, who has been with us from the get-go. This is Benjamin's ninth budget. I'd like to say 10th, aligning with our 10-year anniversary. But as many of you know, this budget got pushed out about 18 months due to a pesky election and a reformatting of some of the finance rules to change how we report with the budgets now reoccurring in the fall. I'm also joined by Laurent Carbonneau, who will be here to answer a lot of the technical questions. Laurent actually did a lot of the hard work yesterday and was in budget lockup, so behind the scenes with no outside access to any of us, and really did a lot of the heavy lifting to get a lot of this information out the door as quickly as possible to so many of you. And of course, last but not least, my colleague Daniel Perry, who is our Federal Affairs Director, who will be running through today's presentation with you and going over a lot of the details. So I will hand it over to Benjamin. Again, just for those who have joined, we're going to keep everybody on mute. We will monitor any questions that you have in the chat, and then we have time allotted at the end of the program today to have a serious discussion around some of those cues that you have. So feel free to get through the presentation and add your questions into the end. We've got a set time for about 45 minutes today, but if we go over a little bit, that is absolutely fine. So thank you again. So many of you have joined from coast to coast to coast. This is probably our biggest budget showing ever. And I will pass it over now to our president, Benjamin Bergen, to offer his hot takes on how he experienced the budget yesterday in Ottawa and what he's hearing on the ground. So Benjamin, the floor is over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Dana, for obviously teeing this up. And yeah, we do have a tremendous amount of folks on the line with us. And so just to give a bit of context about the Council of Canadian Innovators, we're a business council that works with growing and scaling technology firms. We have almost 200 members, and we really look at how do we build capacity for Canada? How do we create prosperity for Canada? How do we move forward on opportunities around sovereignty? And so obviously for us, this budget is a critical one, given the headwinds that we as a country are facing. And so as Dana mentioned, this is my ninth budget, and budgets are really about laying out where the government is going and where they're thinking about spending their time and energy. And when we compare this budget to the budget from last year, it's dramatically different. Words are often synonymous with, sort of how you're thinking about things and where things will ultimately go. And if you sort of dive into some of the words, we see that things like investment is mentioned over 800 times in the budget. Multiple times more than in 2024. We see things like sovereignty showing up over 81 times in the budget. We see things like productivity showing up over 150 times in the budget. And we see things like Buy Canadian showing up in the budget. And, as a reference point, last year, Buy Canadian didn't show up at all in the federal budget. And so what we have here is a document that is beginning to articulate that the government understands the issues and challenges that we as a country are in. And then you begin to look at where are dollars flowing. And so for us, this budget really looks at dollars flowing from an input perspective. And so, we see, and the team will get into it, a tremendous amount of money for dual purpose defense technology. We'll see, the government making commitments on reforming certain programs to make them more efficient. And so a lot of the inputs are good. And the advocacy and lobbying that we've done over the last 5-6 months has really been to sort of highlight to the government where there's some opportunities if inputs begin to flow in those directions. What's a little bit missing from the budget, and where we're definitely going to want to work collaboratively with the government over the next 6 months, is really what are the outputs? So how are we making sure that dollars that we're investing in procurement are actually going to domestic firms when we talk about Buy Canadian. So for us, the next step in advocacy work that we'll be doing will be transitioning, obviously, the inputs and the conversations around dollars and really into focusing on the outputs. And so, the team that's with us today will bring up some examples. But I think the big one here, to just sort of lay a bit of it as a foundational piece, is what does sovereignty mean? What does Buy Canadian mean? And so that's an area where we're going to want to work with the government to ensure that when they talk about Buy Canadian, does that include, a domestic firm headquartered here in Canada, or would something like Amazon Canada be included because it's incorporated in Canada? And so for us, making sure that those dollars are actually flowing and leading to outputs, which is ultimately the commercialization of ideas, is really the key point. So the team's going to walk you through, obviously, the key items and where there's going to be opportunities. And over the next 6 months, you'll see more work from us and from our amazing CEOs and leaders that are part of this organization, holding the government accountable, but moreover, working with them collaboratively to try and turn this budget into one that's leading to outputs. So, with that kind of high-level overview, Dana, I'll pass it back to you and to the team.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben, for your thoughts. And again, noting that all three of these gentlemen are in Ottawa, living, breathing, walking, and experiencing the budget announcements in real time. So they're really, really in the thick of it. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Daniel. And as mentioned, Laurent will be in the background answering any technical questions or providing any sort of further details on some of the more specifics. As many of you know, just to frame the conversation today, the budget has not yet passed. So whilst we're sitting here having a conversation about everything that has been tabled yesterday as a big piece of the Prime Minister's initiatives and mandate, this still has to get over the political hurdle of getting passed in the House. A side note, many of you have probably seen that a Conservative MP crossed the floor yesterday, so that does get the Liberal Party a little bit closer to having a full slate and majority, not quite, but they will require additional support from other MPs in the House to get this budget over the finish line. So with that, Daniel, please take the mic and let's get into the details of the 2025 budget.
All right, thank you, Dana, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining the call today. And as Ben said off the top, this is a budget with the right step forward, but there's still some work that needs to be done. And here at CCI, we are eager to step up and help that work, not only to help grow the ecosystem, but also to better Canada as well. And that's what today's session is about. It is not about the headlines you've been reading over the past 18 hours or so. It's about getting into the nuts and the bolts of the analysis. So let's start by taking a step back and looking at the broader fiscal framework and the position that we find ourselves in. So when it comes to this budget, what we're seeing here is a total spending of $585 billion with a deficit of this year of $78.3 billion. And we're seeing new spending measures over the next 5 years of $90 billion with commitments to reduce our debt to GDP ratios, as well as rein in the spending a little bit on when it comes to the operation side of things and have a surplus by 2028, 2029. And the government is planning to do this through $60 billion in government savings and operation reduction. And as I said, this is the right instinct to shift away from spending more and really looking to retool the tools we have and focusing on it. So one thing that in our conversations at CCI and as well as yesterday with a journalist and our colleagues is something we really noticed was missing here was the sovereignty part. So when we take a look at this piece, and Gabby, if you don't mind just moving to the next slide, we have a little bit more information here when it comes to what needs to be seen. So we need to see this government have a very serious conversation about economic sovereignty. And this is a shift that we saw a bit in the budget, but it's long overdue. And it is essential for Prime Minister Carney and his team to work closely with CEOs and industry leaders to shape programs, policy, and procurement strategies that will drive success for Canadian headquartered companies across Canada. And it is our view here at CCI that Canada still lacks that clear definition of what constitutes a sovereign Canadian company. Without a foundation of clarity, we risk deploying these investments that we see in this budget in the same status quo ways and funding growth that ultimately benefits foreign interests rather than building an enduring Canadian economic power. So when we're taking a look at what we kind of saw in the budget when it came to what CCI asked in our pre-budget submission submitted to the House of Commons Finance Committee, but also Finance Canada, we saw action. We saw action on SR&ED modernization, strategic procurement and buy Canadian exceptions, sovereign AI and compute capacity, defense and dual use technology. We're seeing regulation for stablecoin, open banking moving forward, as well as growth capital for scaling firms, and strong foreign investment review tools. But what we're missing right now that we did not see in this budget was an innovation box for procurement retention, which is key in order for us to keep our ideas here in Canada and help them grow. There's no legislation definition of what a Canadian company is and what it should be. There's also lacking when it comes to Investment Canada reforms because they're still in progress, and there's limited direct trade for scale support. What we need to do here is we need to make sure that the Canadian companies are front in mind for this government. So we talked about what is, what's not in it. So let's take a deeper step and look at some of the pillars that we at CCI focus on. So, Gabby, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, access to capital is one of the big ones here when it comes to SR&ED modernization. And actually, Gabby, do you mind moving to the next slide? Thank you. One more. There we are. So when it comes to SR&ED, this has been a policy that many of you on this call have had an experience with, whether filing for it, using this program and whatnot. And it's something that at CCI we've been advocating for over a decade now, and we're actually seeing some changes. So this budget confirms structural modernization for the tax credit, which focuses on speed, scale, and commercializations. And the key changes that we're seeing is an enhancement of 35% for the refundable tax credit is now available for the first $6 million of eligible spending. This is an increase that we saw from the original program of $3 million. In 2024, they moved up to 4.5, and now we're finally at 6 million. So that will help a lot of the businesses on this call. There's also effective doubling the liquidity available through SR&ED for qualifying Canadian-controlled private companies. And for the first time, newly eligible Canadian public companies will be able to take part in this program. The government has reaffirmed its commitment to including capital expenditures, which was a long ask of this community, and we're happy to see it there. But what for me is most important in this is that all these changes applying to the taxation year that begins on or after December 16th, 2024, which was the date of the fall economic statement, meaning that firms are already within this window can plan with this in mind now. The CRA will also introduce a pre-claim approval process, which is a major step forwards for innovators, and something that we have worked with the CRA to consult with them about what our industry is looking for on this side. They're also moving forward when it comes to the processing time, so it will be 90 days instead of 180 days, and the government will be using AI tools to reduce review burden as well as accelerate filings for low-risk applicants. This means that many companies who are already inside the window of eligibility will now have more access to this and more ability to help move forward and more stability. Our focus when it comes to the execution of this is ensuring that Canadian-owned firms are prioritized, guarding against foreign subsidies, absorbing these benefits, tying SR&ED reform to commercialization and IP retention, as well as outcomes, and maintaining speed to ensure we do not drift back to the long review windows we've seen in the past. This is about predictability and competitive, not just dollar value. And what we have also seen, Gabby, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, we have two other major shifts as well. Sorry, Gabby, one more slide. We also saw $1 billion for the Venture Capital Catalyst Initiative, which is how the government funds programming extending to Canadian VC pools, as well as $750 million towards new growth capital stage beginning in 2026. So now that we have the capital there, we're looking at access to customers. So if we move to the next slide, what we can see here is that the most important part when it comes to customers is leveraging what the Government of Canada is already doing, and that's using procurement to help build companies. So this budget moves forward policies for Buy Canadian strategies in departments, a new program to support SMEs and innovation procurement, as well as creating an Office of Digital Transformation to update government tech adoption. And one of the most important pieces that we've seen from this government to date is this defense procurement, which will be explicitly tied to Canadian supply chains as well as domestic capacity. And this is a very monumental step forward with $81.8 billion of spending. It's a clear opportunity for the ecosystem. Also in this, we're seeing $1 billion going to BDC for capital and defense-related dual-use technology. So if we move to the next slide, what we see as next steps at CCI is just this, that announcements don't make scale, contracts do. And we will continue to ensure that measures for contracting include targets for Canadian firms, that the procurement policy languages prioritize these Canadian firms, and that we're building accountability inside of it. That's not just symbolic, that it actually is meaningful. And we really want to see the prioritizing of cloud, cybersecurity, AI, and dual use adoption throughout the government. And we want to make sure that contracts move forward to ensure that our Canadian innovators have the ability to deliver. And as we move to the next slide and look at access to talent, this where it ties in, where everything kind of comes together. So we have the capital, we have the customers. Now we need to be able to deliver on that. So when we look at bringing in talent to Canada, retaining talent even here, what we're seeing is a shift from this government, and they're moving towards an immigration system that focuses on talent. So PR levels will stabilize. We're seeing a share of economic immigrants increase to 64%. Credential recognition is something this government's focused on moving forward. I know we have a number of firms that work on this, and we want to make sure Canadian companies are part of this moving forward. And something for us as a partner in the global talent stream, we want to make sure that the global talent stream is protected and continues, so we ensure that we have the best skilled folks coming into the country that meet the needs of the jobs. So when we take a look at the next slide, what are we going to be looking to protect to ensure that this government gets right? We're going to be looking at protecting the talent stream, like I mentioned, as well as clear service standards, because a competitive talent system is one that moves fast, but also ensures that the talent is available that your companies need. So when we look at the market framework, this is about rules of infrastructure in the modern economy. And in the modern economy includes sovereign AI and actually owning your data and your information. So the government is moving forward with $925 million for sovereign AI compute capacity. And the Canada Infrastructure Bank will be authorized to invest in digital infrastructure as well. And we've seen a shift. So the Bank of Canada will now be responsible and have the authority over open banking. And we are seeing this government move forward on regulation for stablecoin to create a framework that helps us be competitive with other countries. And something we called for in our pre-budget submission was more funding for IP commercialization programs like the Innovative Asset Collection Program, Elevate IP, and the NRC IP assets. So as we move into the next slide and take a look at what we're focusing on, it's ensuring that sovereign compute includes Canadian-controlled providers, making open banking a meaningful step forward and not just more talk around it. We need to move forward on that, but also tying digital infrastructure and funding to domestic capability and ownership here in Canada. And then the next piece, the defense industrial strategy. So when we move to the next slide, what we're seeing here is the government commit $81.8 billion over 5 years in spending. This is a moment in history for Canada where we're leaning in to our defense skills and scaling it up. So in the new defense industrial strategy, it's more than just about procurement. It's signs from the government that this is an economic strategy to help grow domestic firms, strengthen Canadian supply chains, and anchor Canadian-controlled capacity here in Canada. What matters here is the execution. We need to ensure that Canadian companies are at the forefront of this, and that this investment includes the capacity for new equipment, digital, cyber, and intelligent infrastructure, as well as protecting our Arctic and continuing our defenses, ensuring that we have supply chain resilience, and that training, recruitment, and retention is focused for the Canadian Armed Services. So we want to make sure that when it comes to taxpayers' dollars, funding stays within Canada and we can move forward on that. And as we move to the next slide, this is what we're really focusing on for innovators, what matters when it comes to ensuring that we have what we need. So advanced AI systems, cyber, data platforms, energy systems, and secure cloud. This is a door opening for Canadian dual use and sovereign technology, which is something here at CCI we've worked with the government on to help map out the ecosystem to ensure that we have it. So I'll move to the next slide. when we kind of take a look at what is in this budget, I will pause and pivot because I also want to talk about Borealis very quickly as well, because this was also in our pre-budget submission. The Bureau of Research, Engineering, and Advanced Leadership. We saw the government move forward on this, and it's a major step for us how we build our defense innovation as well as commercialization agency, and intended to bridge research and development and scale. It must be, for us, when we look at this, the opportunity here is important because we must have private sector leadership, we must have commercialization focus and not just be grant driven, and it must be integrated with our procurement system and not operate alone. And it must be Canadian IP stays Canadian, and the goal cannot be for R&D to leave the country, but here in Canada. And then can we just move to the next slide, please? Perfect. I'm a little bit ahead of myself, I see. Let's move to the next slide. Perfect. So when we take a look at what's in this budget, there's a few other things that I wanted to touch on in terms of what was missing. So let's take a look at this slide here. Is the innovation box for IP retention, which is a key part of how we can help grow and keep IP in Canada, as well as clear guidance for defining Canadian tech companies, exporting acceleration strategy for scale-ups, and detailed investment Canada Act changes that are needed to be strategic, but also ensure that we have proper investment that stays here in Canada. When I take a look and see the risks ahead, it comes down to procurement policy being derailed a little bit when it gets into department interpretation, SR&ED benefits captured by foreign subsidies and consulting chains and not actually helping the Canadian scale-up firms, as well as sovereign compute funding flowing mostly to the foreign hyperscalers. And last is defense spending defaulting to foreign nationals instead of supporting the ecosystem here in Canada. So let's take a look at the next slide. And what we kind of see as I wrap up here, when it comes to what's next for CCI, it comes down to defining what a Canadian company is, IP governance, data and control. We want to ensure that SR&ED rolls out fast and focused, building procurement enforcements that allow for Canadian companies to be at the forefront, but also ensuring that reporting is there, setting sovereign compute adoption criteria, protecting talent in our ecosystem, as well as shaping investment Canada Act by modernizing around IP and ensuring defense and dual use programs favor domestic champions. This is not just about announcements, it's about who benefits. So to conclude, this budget aligns with many of our priorities, but there's still that more needs to be done. Our role is not to sell the budget, our role is to deliver for Canadian-owned companies, Canadian workers, and protect Canadian IP. We will push for these reforms, and I look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel, for that really comprehensive overview. I'm just going to open the mic to Laurent again, mentioning that he's kind of been in the thick of it in lockup yesterday, and see if you have any kind of additional context or hot takes you'd like to share with the crowd today. I'm mindful that there's questions coming in, so I'm monitoring those, and we'll get to them in a moment. But Laurent, if you wanted to just add any context, sort of any thoughts you may have.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for us, obviously, as you mentioned, Dana, this is the Carney government's first budget, and I think it's always instructive to kind of look at that as a bit of table setting for what to expect in terms of kind of style. And of course, I think we'd be remiss in not mentioning, of course, that the elephant in the room here is, of course, our relationship with the US. And I think the Carney government's vision from the beginning has been very much that the best thing Canada can do to have a solid footing in dealing with that very difficult relationship at the moment is to put itself on a stronger economic footing. And I think we've definitely seen that that's the government's through line of this budget. I do think, for what it's worth, and someone in the comments earlier was kind of asking about this. If you're the focus of promoting investment in this budget is very much on physical assets, which is great. I think, clearly we do have an infrastructure gap. There's a need to catch up on a lot of traditional industries that have been perhaps not as heavy investment in the last 10 years or so. So that's welcome. But I do think that, from CCI's point of view, what's going to build prosperity in Canada is having more scaling firms that are building off of their intangible assets. And I think that's where perhaps we might want to see more vision in the future. I think, very good news for lots of heavy investments in infrastructure and in other pieces, but perhaps less on intangibles. And I think, I don't want to be too critical here. I certainly think some good steps here. We talked about SR&ED. I think the defense procurement is an opportunity for Canada to build a lot of really valuable intangible assets that, not only make the country safer, but also contribute to building Canadian export leadership. And I think that's great. But I do think, more attention to our overall economic strategy. Again, as someone just asked, shifting towards a more sovereign economic strategy that recognizes the critical underlying importance of intangible assets. I think we've certainly seen some progress on that front, but I do think we'd like to see more. There was an allusion in the IP section of building on what's been announced with more collaboration with scaling companies. I think that's really excellent. I would like to continue that discussion with government. So bright points, things to build on. And certainly, I think the contrast with the 2024 budget, which is, I think the worst in memory for innovators, with the changes to capital gains inclusion rate. The conversation has changed, the tone has changed, the focus has changed. I think we still have a ways to go, but this is a promising step in the right direction, and certainly a step in rebuilding the relationship between the Canadian federal government and innovators.
That's the best thing about Laurent. He will never hold back and give you the honest truth all the time. Seeing a few comments in the chat, and maybe Daniel and Laurent, you can help me manage here. I'll just maybe kick off by responding to two pieces. One was around IP enhancements, and there was a question around Elevate IP and the IAC getting refunded. So that is indeed the case. IP enhancements, renewed investments effectively were drying up, and so this is a renewal of the funding. There's 22.5 million going into the Innovation Asset Collective, which is really good news for the team over there. Close to 85 million for ISED's Elevate IP program, which has been directly catered back to Canadian companies, but certainly needs a little bit of fortifying to support some of the larger organizations, and then 75 million over 3 years to NRC's IP Assist program. So any of you who have ITAs that you work with in the NRC space, I think that that's a good question to be asking those folks while you're developing and designing your technology. The other, there was a recent question, and I'm moving around here just because there's a couple of recurring things. The question around Buy Canadian, around some of the pushback against the trade rules. I think everything seems to be on the table with this government on figuring out how to renegotiate and reposition Canada for trading purposes. I will drop actually the PDF of the budget into the chat just so people have reference. It is a very long document, but you can see it's posted online. And when it comes to the Buying Canadian piece, there is this sort of explicit section on page 144 of 493 that says, to facilitate the implementation of the Buy Canada policy, the government will also implement regulatory amendments to ensure that Buy Canadian aspects of federal procurement processes are not subject to review by the Canadian International Trade Tribunal. So, like many things in this budget, devil is in the details, but a sort of throwaway line to mention that the trade rules are acknowledged and that we somehow need to overcome them to ensure that there's some freedom to operate, so to speak, for Canadian companies selling into government will indeed have an impact. So a couple other questions of note here. Maybe, Laurent, you could tackle this. I know there's a lot of AI companies on the call today and folks who are leveraging AI, and it is a very hot topic across global tech systems. Leveraging Canadian AI services, AI tools, the government is planning to utilize. Any kind of comments on that? There have been many comments, I believe, from the minister himself on saying we're not going to be able to do full sovereign here in Canada. $1 billion going to AI. Do you want to just break that down for folks on the line and give a little context to that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of moving pieces here. So one piece is the 925 million announced for sovereign infrastructure. I should be very clear about this. 125 million of that is new money, and the rest is repurposed from what was left of the 2.4 billion that was announced a couple of years ago. So I think we'll await details to see what the change in direction is going to be on that in more granular terms. In terms of adoption, we completely agree that this is important. Actually, if someone can drop our submission we just put in for the AI task force, I think that'd be very helpful if folks want to get some more color on what we're thinking about AI. It's worth saying that in light of that, I think the government is going to be chewing on the response to the consultation on the new AI strategy that they just ran. So for our expectations for this budget, we're not to see really a lot of new ground broken on AI just because of the timing. I would expect to see something in the new year, perhaps earlier, but I think that would be a surprising burst of speed. Certainly not one I would have seen in a while. So from our point of view, where we think this should go, is that we want there to be a real focus on, as far as an AI strategy goes, a focus on the same barriers to scale that other innovators face. Like, it's not unique to AI companies, but an AI strategy should be worrying about that. The second piece is building out more sovereign infrastructure. This isn't necessarily a piece that's going to be, we can do 100% in Canada for everything, but there should be a sovereign capacity for high sensitivity needs of the government's own in-house sort of operational requirements like defense, intelligence, etc. The third piece is, going to where the puck is actually going, and not being so focused on the academic side and being much more focused, even on the commercial side, not doubling down on models, but going to where can Canada succeed in the application layer and making available, for instance, proprietary high quality data sets that are going to be the difference maker in that field. So that's a bit of high level on AI. More to come. We weren't really expecting a lot there just because of the timing, but we have some defined views that you can. I think someone has dropped in the chat. So happy to debrief on that a different time.
We're getting some comments about SR&ED, but I just wanted to add a couple other pieces related to the AI on the AI front. One sort of piece of note is that the Canadian Infrastructure Bank is now being able to directly invest in AI. This is something, a bit of a departure from traditional investments from the Infrastructure Bank, which many of you will be familiar, really tied to some of these big national projects. So I do think that there is a sign there that AI, to the extent that it can be sovereign, is now slowly kind of coming into the realm of being a major national project. And with that, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank has also opened up its envelope. So I think it was 35 billion before, now it's being up to another 10 billion. With the ability to invest directly in AI related to infrastructure projects. So I think what's positive about that is that we're starting to see some of these major AI investments being really woven into our national industrial strategy, and not just sort of being a sidebar tech policy. It's really being viewed as something that's integral to building out larger pieces of our Canadian economic fabric. And then one other comment around the AI stuff, but also related to digital and procurement, is that this new Office of Digital Transformation, some questions are coming up about that, which is very interesting. Again, devil's in the details, but some configuration of a new organization inside government to be really housing the responsibility of some of this procurement, I think points to the fact that there's so many procurement layers inside different departments across the government of Canada, and to be able to centralize and have some of that policy and regulation really housed in one area shows that there's a desire to kind of streamline, which, with the hope that there'll be some more efficient procurement pieces. And then, of course, there was a throwaway line that the Minister of AI will also be partnering more intentionally with new infrastructure projects and rolling out some new MOUs. So that's a very exciting prospect for, I believe, many of the folks on the line today. Laurent, mindful we have 10 minutes left and there's still some questions coming in. A little bit around taxation, a little bit around SR&ED. What did we see in SR&ED that we vibe with, and what do we think that could have been made a little bit better? And if that extends out into any of the corporate tax stuff, which we obviously didn't see a lot of tax breaks in this budget, thoughts from your perspective in that realm would be super helpful.
Yeah, I think directionally, SR&ED changes were very good. We saw, as Daniel sort of outlined, I don't want to go too back into it, but changes to taxable capital thresholds, the expenditure limits. I think, very, very important for early stage companies that have gone public is their eligibility for the enhanced credit, I think is really big for them. The new administrative changes are very valuable, I think, for a lot of companies. And I think it's good that it's flexible. Companies that want to take advantage of pre-approval can, but they're not forced into it if they don't want to go that way, and that the current setup works for them. That's good stuff. Obviously, we'd still want to see further streamlining and simplification. We understand that compliance is a real burden. So, more to do there. I think as well, there's been a large conversation in the last several years on the degree to which SR&ED being taken up by foreign companies, is good or bad for Canada, and the degree to which the spillovers from that research actually make their way into the Canadian economy. I think more work to go forward on that and really understand, the impacts and if that needs to change. So I think much more to do on those fronts. As Daniel said, the patent box was a piece that we were hopeful would make it in and had been signposted and didn't. I think some of the math around that may have changed. So I think more information needed from the government on their state of thinking on this. On broader deductions, I do think there are some big ones in here. I think the new super productivity super deduction, which I'm gonna have to get my head around, is interesting. But I think to me that really speaks to what I was saying earlier about this is very much focused on tangible versus intangible. Though I really should hasten to add something we've asked for a long time, which is the ability to write off expenses related to the acquisition of patents or development of patents is now in there, which is good and I think really positive. So that's great. But those are pieces we're certainly curious about. A lot of the clean tech credits are more granular, and I'm still kind of trying to suss out exactly what the details of those are. But very, perhaps positive steps there. But yes, some movement on tax. I think more to do.
There was a question as well early on in the presentation about healthcare. Just to highlight that there's a new healthcare infrastructure fund. Those of you who are very familiar with the federal health transfer payments know that there is a division of responsibility that exists between the federal government and the provincial government in terms of oversight, particularly relevant for this call, anything to do sort of with digital ID and digital patient information is really regulated at the at the provincial level, but there is an announcement of a $5 billion commitment to a new health infrastructure fund. Really, I think this goes to hospitals, development charges, and other taxes related to some of the bigger pieces in sort of the hard physical pieces related to healthcare. But I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that from the health minister and other ministers adjacent as we get through sort of the meat and potatoes of the budget. I'm mindful we've got about six minutes left, and it is always our greatest pleasure to give people time back in their day. I think we've covered most of these questions. Myself and Daniel and Laurent, all of our contact information is available on our website, and feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn if you have any other questions. I will just offer the floor one more time to Daniel and to Laurent for any pieces that you felt we missed that should be highlighted. I see Laurent wants to jump
I
on
have
it.
one really quick one because people are asking when the SR&ED changes take effect and are retroactive. It was announced in the budget that they were retroactive to the fall economic statement, so December 16th, 2024. And we got in so much into the alchemy of when do exactly tax changes become official. The high level understanding that everyone should have is that when they are announced in the budget, they are official. However, the budget actually does have to pass, which was not the case last year, which created some weird difficulties around the capital gains changes, but that was very atypical. But yes, so they consider them operational and retroactive to December.
Daniel, any closing thoughts?
No, I think we have our marching orders and we have our work to do, so we're going to get it done.
Great. One final call out is I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is that CCI is a not-for-profit organization and we are fully funded by members, many of you who are on the call today, and that is how we get our work done, and that is how we are able to contribute to getting things like the budget and pushing forward on initiatives. So if there are ever any questions about, we're getting lots of applause, so that tells me lots of our members are on the line. For those of you who are interested in membership or curious, please do reach out. We're really about building the ecosystem. All boats rise together if we let them, as the tides come in and out, as they say, from coast to coast to coast here. But really, we can't do this without the work of our membership. And so thank you to all of you who have joined today. Know that there is always more room in the tent. And if you have any other questions about the budget today or CCI as a whole, we're always available and happy to answer those. And with that, I think we did it. 4 minutes back. That's great. I would love to finish this call off by saying go Jays go, but I guess that moment has passed as well. A little late. Go budget go. Thanks everybody for joining and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.